The day my ex-husband begged for a second chance, I almost believed him, until I remembered the secret I'd kept for years, the one that could shatter his world. I still remember the way the phone rang that morning, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet of my kitchen. I was standing at the counter, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the faded sunflowers, when I saw his name flash across the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart thudding in my chest. It had been almost 3 years since our divorce, and in all that time, I'd done everything I could to keep my life moving forward, one careful step at a time. But there he was, Mark, the man I once promised forever to, the man who'd broken that promise in 1,000 small ways before finally shattering it for good. I let the phone ring twice before I answered, my voice steady but cool. "Hello." There was a pause, then his voice, familiar but softer than I remembered. "Hey, Leela, it's me." I closed my eyes, bracing myself. "I know, what do you want, Mark?" He sighed, and I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair, the way he always did when he was nervous. "Can we talk? Please, I need to see you." I hesitated, glancing at the clock. My daughter, Sophie, was still asleep upstairs, her backpack already packed for school. The house was quiet, the world not quite awake. I thought about saying no, about hanging up and going back to my carefully rebuilt life. But something in his voice, something raw and desperate, made me pause. "Fine," I said, "but not here. Meet me at the park, 10 o'clock. He agreed, relief flooding his words, and I hung up before he could say anything else. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, the morning sun just beginning to warm the dew on the grass. I sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding. I watched a pair of toddlers chase each other around the playground, their laughter bright and wild. For a moment, I let myself remember the early days of my marriage, before the lies, before the heartbreak, before the secret that changed everything. Mark arrived a few minutes later, looking older than I remembered. There were new lines around his eyes, a heaviness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, sitting beside me on the bench. I nodded, keeping my distance. "What's this about, Mark?" He took a deep breath, his hands twisting in his lap. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about everything that happened. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but I want to make things right. I want another chance." I stared at him, searching his face for the man I once loved. "Why now?" He looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. "I miss you, Leela. I miss our life. I miss Sophie. I want to be a family again." I felt a flicker of anger, sharp and hot. "You had a family, Mark. You walked away." He shook his head, his eyes shining with regret. "I was stupid. I thought I wanted something else, but I was wrong. I want you. I want us." I looked at him, my heart aching with old wounds. I thought about the years I'd spent picking up the pieces, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, about the secret I'd kept buried deep inside me. I almost told him then, almost let the truth spill out, but I held back, watching him squirm, watching him try to rewrite our history. After a long silence, I stood. "I need to get Sophie to school. I'll think about what you said." He reached for my hand, his grip tight. "Please, Leela, just give me a chance." I pulled away, my voice cold. "We'll see." I walked back to my car, my mind racing. I knew Mark. I knew his patterns, his charm, his ability to make me doubt myself. But I also knew the truth, the secret I'd kept for years, the one that could destroy him if it ever came to light. As I drove home, I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the park fade into the distance. I thought about Sophie, about the life I'd built for us, about the promise I'd made to protect her at all costs. I knew I couldn't let Mark back in, not without telling him the truth, not without revealing the secret child he never knew he had. Don't go anywhere, because what happened next would unravel every lie, every promise, and every hope I'd ever had for a second chance. Before Mark's call, my life had finally settled into something like peace. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I first said, "I do," but it was mine, and I'd worked hard for every bit of it. Sophie was the center of my world. She was 8 now, curious, stubborn with her father's dark eyes and my wild hair. She loved to read, to draw, to ask questions that made me laugh and sometimes made me cry. Every morning, we had our little rituals. Pancakes on Mondays, silly songs in the car on the way to school, a secret handshake before she ran off to join her friends. She was my reason for getting up every day, my anchor when the world felt unsteady. I worked part-time at the local bakery, a job I'd taken after the divorce. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose. I liked the rhythm of it, the early mornings, the smell of fresh bread, the regular customers who greeted me by name. My boss, Mrs. Patel, was kind and understanding, always willing to let me leave early if Sophie was sick or if I needed to meet with her teacher. Our house was small but cozy, filled with second-hand furniture and Sophie's artwork taped to every wall. I'd painted the kitchen yellow, hoping to bring a little sunshine inside even on the grayest days. We had a tiny backyard where Sophie and I planted tomatoes and sunflowers every spring, and a porch swing where I liked to sit with a cup of tea after she went to bed. My parents lived a few hours away, and while we weren't as close as I wished, they called every Sunday to check in. My mother always asked about Sophie, about work, about whether I'd started dating again. I always gave the same answer. "Not yet, Mom. I'm not ready." The truth was, I'd tried. I'd gone on a few dates, let myself hope for a fresh start. But every time I found myself comparing them to Mark, his easy smile, his quick wit, the way he used to make me feel like the only woman in the world. And every time I remembered the way he'd left, the way he'd broken every promise, the way he'd made me feel small and unworthy. So I focused on Sophie, on work, on building a life that was safe and steady. I made friends with the other moms at school, joined a book club, volunteered at the library on weekends. I told myself I was happy, or at least content. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and wonder if I'd ever really moved on, if I'd ever really forgiven Mark or myself. When Mark called, it was like a stone thrown into a still pond. Suddenly, everything felt unsettled again. I found myself replaying old memories. Our wedding day, the first time we held Sophie, the night he left. I remembered the fights, the tears, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. I also remembered the secret I'd kept from him, the child I'd carried in silence, the decision I'd made alone, the pain I'd buried deep. It had happened during the last year of our marriage, when things were already falling apart. Mark was distant, working late, coming home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. I suspected he was cheating, but I never had proof. I was lonely, desperate for connection, for comfort, for something to hold on to. That's when I met Alex. He was a friend of a friend, kind and gentle, with a quiet strength that drew me in. We talked for hours, shared stories, laughed about the absurdity of life. One night, after too much wine and too many tears, we crossed a line I never thought I would. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks later. By then, Mark and I were barely speaking. I told him I was expecting, and for a moment, I thought it might save us. But he was cold, distant, more interested in his phone than in the life growing inside me. I lost the baby at 12 weeks. I never told Mark the truth, that the child wasn't his, that I'd been unfaithful, that I'd carried that guilt with me every day since. I buried the secret, convinced it was better for everyone if it stayed hidden. After the divorce, I tried to put it behind me. I focused on Sophie, on work, on building a new life. But the secret lingered, a shadow I couldn't escape. Now, with Mark asking for a second chance, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't let him back in, not without telling him the truth, not without risking everything I'd built. But I also knew that secrets have a way of coming out, no matter how hard you try to keep them buried. Don't go anywhere, because the first cracks of suspicion were about to become impossible to ignore, and the past was about to catch up with all of us. After that meeting in the park, Mark started calling and texting almost every day. At first, I ignored him, but he was persistent, sending long messages late at night, leaving voicemails full of apologies and promises. He wanted to see Sophie, he said. He wanted to talk, to explain, to make things right. I tried to keep my boundaries firm. I told him he could see Sophie on weekends, but only if he called ahead. I told him I wasn't ready to talk about us, that I needed time. But the truth was, his presence unsettled me. Every time I saw his name on my phone, I felt a mix of anger, longing, and fear. Sophie was excited at first. She missed her dad, even if she didn't say it out loud. She asked 100 questions before every visit. What would they do? Where would they go? Would he bring her favorite snacks? I tried to hide my anxiety to let her have her time with him, but I watched her closely when she came home, searching her face for any sign of disappointment. One Saturday, after Mark dropped Sophie off, she came into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. "Daddy says he wants to come to my school play next month," she said, bouncing on her toes. "He says he wants to be around more." I forced a smile, my heart twisting. "That's nice, sweetheart, I'm sure he'll love it." She nodded, then ran off to her room, humming to herself. I stood at the sink, staring out the window, my mind racing. I wanted to believe Mark had changed, that he really wanted to be a better father, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days later, I ran into Alex at the grocery store. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the night we'd said goodbye, both of us knowing it was for the best. He looked older, a little grayer, but his smile was the same. "Leela," he said, surprised. "It's been a long time." I smiled, my heart pounding. "It has, how are you?" We chatted for a few minutes, about work, about Sophie, about the weather. He didn't mention the past, and neither did I, but as I walked away, I felt the old guilt rise up, sharp and fresh. That night, I dreamed about the baby I'd lost. I saw her face, imagined what she would have looked like, wondered what kind of person she would have become. I woke up in tears, the ache in my chest as real as it had ever been. Mark kept pushing for more time with Sophie. He wanted to take her on a weekend trip, just the two of them. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to let her go. I told him I needed to think about it, that I wanted to talk to Sophie first. He grew frustrated, his messages turning sharper. "Why are you making this so hard, Leela? I'm her father. I have a right to see her." I tried to stay calm, to remind myself that I was doing what was best for Sophie. But the pressure was building, and I felt myself starting to crack. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, I sat on the porch staring at the stars. My phone buzzed, a message from Mark. "I know I messed up, Leela, but I love you. I want to try again. Please, just give me a chance." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I thought about all the times I'd forgiven him, all the times I'd let him back in, only to be hurt again. I thought about the secret I'd kept, the one that could destroy everything if it ever came out. I knew I couldn't keep running from the past. I knew I had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. "Don't go anywhere," because the truth was about to come out, and none of us would ever be the same. The next week, Mark showed up at my door unannounced. It was a Thursday evening, the sky heavy with rain, Sophie curled up on the couch with a book. I opened the door, surprised to see him standing there, his hair damp, his eyes tired. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. Sophie looked up, her face lighting up. "Daddy." He hugged her, holding her close, then sent her off to finish her homework. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us thick. "I meant what I said, Leela," he began. "I want another chance. I want to come home." I stared at him, searching his face for the truth. "Why now, Mark? Why after all this time?" He looked down, his hands twisting in his lap. "I've changed. I've been going to therapy, working on myself. I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes, but I want to make it right." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "You can't just erase the past, Mark. You can't pretend it never happened." He reached for my hand, his eyes pleading. "Please, Leela, I love you. I love Sophie. I want our family back." I pulled my hand away, anger flaring. "You left us. You chose someone else. You broke every promise you ever made." He flinched, guilt flickering across his face. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I want to try again. I want to be the man you deserve." I stood, my hands shaking. "I need time to think." He nodded, standing as well. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." After he left, I sat at the table, my heart pounding. I thought about the years I'd spent picking up the pieces, about the secret I'd kept, about the child I'd lost. I wondered if I could ever trust him again, if I could ever trust myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, memories swirling in my mind. I thought about Alex, about the night we'd shared, about the baby I'd carried in silence. I thought about the guilt, the grief, the shame I'd buried deep. The next morning, I called Alex. My hands shook as I dialed his number, my heart racing. "Leela," he answered, surprised. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. "I need to see you, please." We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He looked worried, his eyes searching mine. "What's going on?" he asked. I told him everything. About Mark, about the divorce, about the secret I'd kept for so long. I told him about the baby, about the loss, about the pain I'd carried alone. He listened, his face pale, his hands clenched on the table. When I finished, he reached across, taking my hand in his. "I wish you told me," he said softly. "I would have been there for you." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I was scared. I didn't want to ruin your life. I didn't want to ruin mine. He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining. "You didn't ruin anything, Leela. You did what you had to do." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the past settling between us. When I got home, Mark was waiting on the porch. He stood as I approached, his face tense. "Where were you?" he asked. I hesitated, then told him the truth. I was with Alex. I needed to talk to him. He stared at me, anger and hurt warring in his eyes. "Why?" I took a deep breath, my voice steady. "Because I have a secret, Mark. One I've kept for years. I was unfaithful. I got pregnant. I lost the baby. It wasn't yours." He staggered back, shock and betrayal etched on his face. "Why didn't you tell me?" I wiped my eyes, my voice breaking. "Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't want to hurt you. Because I thought it was better if you never knew." He shook his head, his voice raw. "All this time, you let me believe it was my fault. You let me beg for a second chance." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, Mark, I really am." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the porch, the truth finally out, the weight of it both crushing and freeing. Don't go anywhere, because the fallout from this revelation would reach further than I ever imagined, and the path to healing would be longer and harder than I ever expected. The days after I told Mark the truth were some of the loneliest of my life. He stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped coming by to see Sophie. I tried to explain to her that her father was busy, that he needed some time, but she saw through the lie. She grew quiet, withdrawn, her laughter fading into silence. I tried to keep our routines going, pancakes on Mondays, secret handshakes before school, bedtime stories every night, but the house felt emptier, the air heavier. I missed Mark, even after everything. I missed the way he used to make Sophie laugh, the way he'd hold me close on cold nights, the way he'd make me believe even for a moment that we could be happy. Word spread quickly, as it always does in small towns. I heard the whispers at the bakery, at the grocery store, at the school pickup line. People looked at me differently, some with pity, some with judgment, some with curiosity. I overheard one woman say, "She's the one who cheated. No wonder he left her." Another replied, "I heard she kept a whole child a secret. Who does that?" I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell them the whole story. But I knew it wouldn't matter. People believe what they want to believe. The truth is always messier than the rumors. My parents called, worried and confused. My mother's voice was sharp with disappointment. "Why didn't you tell us, Leela? Why did you keep this from us?" I tried to explain, but the words caught in my throat. "I was scared, Mom. I didn't want to hurt anyone." She sighed, her anger softening. "You're still our daughter. We love you. But you have to let people in, Leela. You can't carry everything alone." I promised to try, but it was easier said than done. Alex reached out, checking in every few days. He offered to meet, to talk, to help in any way he could. I appreciated his kindness, but I needed space. I needed time to process everything, to figure out who I was without Mark, without the secret, without the weight of guilt I'd carried for so long. Sophie struggled the most. She missed her father, missed the family we used to be. She started acting out at school, talking back to teachers, refusing to do her homework, picking fights with her friends. I met with her teacher, Mrs. Green, who listened with compassion. "She's hurting, Leela. She needs you to be strong for her. She needs to know she's still loved." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I'm trying, I really am." One afternoon, Mark showed up at the house, his face drawn and tired. Sophie ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. He hugged her tight, then knelt down to look her in the eye. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've been gone too long. I love you. I'll always love you." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you too, Daddy." He stood, turning to me. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the silence heavy with everything we'd lost. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Leela," he said quietly. "But I want to be there for Sophie. I want to be a good father." I nodded, relief and sorrow mingling in my chest. "That's all I want, Mark, for her to be happy." He left soon after, but he started coming by more often, taking Sophie to the park, helping with her homework, showing up for her school play. It wasn't the family I'd dreamed of, but it was something. It was a start. The whispers in town faded, replaced by new gossip, new scandals. People moved on, as they always do. But the scars remained on my heart, on Sophie's, on the life we'd tried so hard to build. But I was still here. I was still standing. And I was determined to find my way back to myself, to my daughter, to a future that was finally, truly my own. Spring came, and with it, a slow thaw in my heart. The world outside our window turned green again, the air sweet with the promise of new beginnings. Sophie and I planted sunflowers in the backyard, our hands deep in the dirt, our laughter rising above the old fence. For the first time in months, I felt hope blooming alongside those tiny green shoots. I started seeing a counselor, a gentle woman named Dr. Harris. She listened without judgment as I poured out the story of my marriage, my secret, my grief. She helped me see that forgiveness wasn't just something I owed Mark or Alex or even my parents. It was something I owed myself. I learned to let go of the shame, to accept that I was human, that I'd made mistakes, but that I was still worthy of love. Sophie began to heal too. She made new friends at school, joined the soccer team, started drawing again. Her laughter came easier, her hugs tighter. We created new rituals, movie nights with popcorn, Saturday morning pancakes, long walks in the park with our dog, Daisy. I watched her grow braver, kinder, more resilient, and I knew I was doing something right. Mark and I found a new rhythm. We weren't friends, not yet, but we were partners in parenting. He showed up for Sophie, kept his promises, learned to listen instead of just talk. Sometimes we'd sit together at her soccer games, sharing stories about her childhood, laughing at her stubbornness, marveling at how much she'd grown. There were still hard days, days when the past felt too close, when old wounds ached, but we kept moving forward, one step at a time. Alex and I met for coffee one afternoon, the air between us easier than I expected. We talked about the past, about the choices we'd made, about the baby we'd lost. We cried together, then laughed, then sat in comfortable silence. He told me he was seeing someone new, that he was happy, that he hoped I would be too. "I am," I said, and I meant it. I started writing again, journals, letters, stories for Sophie. I wrote about forgiveness, about starting over, about the way love can survive even the deepest wounds. I wrote about the baby I'd lost, about the lessons I'd learned, about the hope I still carried in my heart. I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club, started volunteering at the library on weekends. I let myself dream again, of travel, of new love, of a life that was bigger and brighter than the one I'd left behind. One evening, as Sophie and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Are you happy, Mom?" she asked, her voice soft. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I am, sweetheart, I really am." She grinned, her eyes shining. "Me too." I hugged her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. I knew there would still be hard days, still be moments of doubt and regret. But I also knew that we were strong, that we were brave, that we were enough, just the two of us together. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before Mark begged for a second chance. I was stronger, wiser, more compassionate with myself and with the people I loved. I knew that life would never be perfect, that there would always be pain and loss and disappointment. But I also knew that I could survive, that I could rebuild, that I could find joy in the small, everyday moments. I looked around at the life I'd created. The sunflowers blooming, Sophie laughing, the house filled with light, and felt a quiet sense of peace. I was still here, I was still standing, and I was ready for whatever came next. Don't go anywhere. The final reflection is next, and it's for anyone who's ever had to find themselves again after losing everything. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. Sometimes the secrets we keep, out of fear, out of shame, out of love, end up shaping our lives in ways we never expected. When my ex begged for a second chance, I almost let myself believe in the fairy tale of starting over. But the truth has a way of coming out, and sometimes it's the only thing that can set us free. If you've ever carried a secret that felt too heavy to share, or if you've ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone else, I hope you know you're not alone. Healing isn't quick, and it isn't easy. But with time, honesty, and a little bit of grace, it is possible. Sometimes the real strength is in letting go, not just of the people who hurt you, but of the guilt and shame you never deserved to carry. Would you have told your ex the truth or kept your secret forever? Have you ever had to start over after a betrayal? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Thank you for listening and for being part of this family. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, even after the deepest heartbreak, you can still choose to begin again.